Welcome to Chapter 6. Today is about mastering and identifying our hunger. A lot of times our hunger versus cravings are very confused, and we have to understand why and how this first started coming around. So what has caused you to not be able to distinguish your hunger or fullness comes from several things, but number one is dieting. Diets have told us when to eat, how to eat, the times of what to eat, what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, and it's totally made us not be able to make our own decisions for our bodies. So when we aren't on a diet or told what to do, we just wait for kind of this ravenous hunger, our physical hunger for our stomach to be so hungry. And then we tend to overeat and eat past fullness. And that's where we blame ourselves. So we have to also think back to when we were little, we were able to stop eating when we were full. We naturally did that without anybody telling us to do so. But that's where also first triggers can come into play. For an example, for me, when I grew up, I was told I need to finish my plate. So even when I was physically full and I stopped as a child, I was still had to finish my plate, and I was pushed past my normal amount of hunger, which is a lot, essentially a trigger that could also be from you. So you could be pushing past your fullness and not knowing when hunger is or when fullness is, because you were taught this when you were little, because we had to finish our plates. So there are, besides just now dieting or possible family environmental factors that cause us to not understand our body and push past this fullness and not understand hunger, it also comes from our food. So certain foods that are called hyperpalatable foods play a role. And today our society is called a Western society or a Western diet because our food is low in fiber, low in protein, high in saturated fats, high in simple sugar. And this this collaboration or this function of foods all together equate to a hyper palatable food. And then within our hunger and process of eating, it triggers or hinders our specific hormones that help us to distinguish fullness and things like that. So several factors that play a role for hunger, fullness. And I'm going to explain to you the difference between two different types of eating styles too. One is called hedonic eating and one is called homeostatic. So hedonic hunger or hedonic eating refers to the consumption of foods just for pleasure. That's where this hyperpalatable food, the Western diet, comes into play. That's where your hormones are hindered and we're just trying to eat for pleasure, often pushing past fullness several times. Then there's the homeostatic hunger or homeostatic eating, which ensures that you just eat when you're hungry and you stop when you're full or satiated. Foods with the higher amount of sugar, sodium, and fat increases the food intake and stimulates your brain reward system for this hedonic eating due to hyperpalatable foods. Long-term consumption of hyperpalatable foods impact your signaling brainwaves from your brain to your stomach in order to related to food control. This is expressed in different ways of hunger. So long-term consumption of these hyperpalatable foods impact your signaling pathways between your stomach, gut, and your brain, being able to control the food. So this is where your satiety signals get hindered and your signals and hormones are kind of all messed up. And that's where your overeating comes into play. Eating behaviors are something that are also weight neutral. They impact everybody. And they are improved through psychological help and promoting greater behaviors. So what we've tried to do in the interim before all these chapters is start to have these health promoting behaviors. And now we're going to try to establish the difference between our physical hunger and a craving. So hunger refers to the absence of fullness. This is the feeling of hunger brought about by an empty stomach. And a food craving is differentiated from the feelings of hunger through the specific, like the intensity of it. That as well, a food craving usually is satisfied by a consumption of a particular food, and hunger can be alleviated by consumption of any types of food. A food craving is more of an intense desire to eat a particular food, and food cravings, based on science and based on clients' background, they often happen towards late afternoon or evening. There are several ways or reasons why a craving happens and is so intense in the late afternoons or evenings. It could be because you're not eating enough protein during the day. High protein is associated with more feelings of fullness, more satiation, and if we aren't doing that, you can have these intense cravings later in the day. So now that we learned a little bit about hunger and the difference between hunger and cravings, believe it or not, there are 8 different triggers, or 8 plus different triggers for hunger. So the first one is physical hunger. That is your biological need to eat. That is the stomach rumbling. That is the basic type 1 hunger. Next is practical hunger. Practical hunger is when you aren't physically hungry in the moment, but you know you will be hungry soon. This is part of getting to understand and know your body, and it's based on schedule eating. So we have been trying to establish regular eating patterns. So if we typically eat at 8 a.m., 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. and we know we have an event now around 5 p.m. that we might not be home till 6, 7. Like, a practical hunger means having a planned snack, even when you're not physically hungry, just being mindful of your schedule so you can not have that ravenous hunger and then have the meal later on, versus just skipping. Then we're going to be starving and we're going to make more of an irrational decision with our hunger. So practical hunger is something more of the mindful eating concept, getting to understand and know our body better. Next is emotional hunger. Emotional hunger is eating to cope with our emotions like stress, sadness, boredom. This is driven more by feelings versus a physical need. 4 is social hunger. So this is eating in a social setting or eating influenced by people, not even if you're physically hungry or not. Next is visual hunger. So this is triggered by TV, advertisement, things in the supermarket, social media, things like that. It could be something else someone else is eating too can trigger that. That's visual. Thirst hunger is sometimes dehydration can be mistaken for physical hunger or a craving. And then there's sensory hunger. So this is a smell. A smell can trigger something in our brain and then want the food or item. And then last is hormonal hunger. So this is during certain times of the month for women, our hunger can be triggered due to hormonal fluctuations, especially during that time of the month. Everyone is different. Some people are before it, some people are during it, some people are even after it. So being able to understand that there are certain different types of hunger triggers that affect us is super important. So the point is, if you didn't buy a journal yet, you need to definitely have one now, because we're going to journal and distinguish if we are eating for physical hunger versus a craving. We just focused about establishing regular eating patterns before. So if you are someone who is eating breakfast in the morning because they are trying to establish that pattern and you are not physically hungry and it obviously is not a craving, you're just going to mark a 0 next to that. So I'm going to explain that in this document that you're going to receive and the homework that I am going to assign you to do. Okay. Here is the hunger and craving scale that I created to help you understand the difference between each and what we're kind of going to go do or how we're going to use this for ourselves. So it's important when we're doing hunger versus cravings to check in with yourself and regularly assess. So for every meal you're going to be using is distinguishing the difference between a hunger versus craving and then where you are on the hunger scale. You want to still eat mindfully, so pay attention to your body's cues of where you are pushing past that fullness, where you're sitting in that. We'll go to the scale soon. To help feel satiated and full, it's important to create and continue to have balanced meals with proteins, fiber, complex carbs, and all those things spoken about before. Managing cravings. So when you have a craving, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Right now I'm recording this and Halloween is coming up and everyone is like trying to avoid candy, my cravings, there's triggers everywhere. But the thing is, the more that you say no to something, the more intense that craving becomes. So you want to be able to indulge in that craving mindfully, because when you ignore it, let's say you have, instead of having one Kit Kat that you just want to have one and you just are going to ignore it, you're going to look for a yogurt to satisfy you, maybe a piece of fruit, maybe a chocolate covered piece of fruit. Maybe you're going to have cereal. Then you might have chocolate chips. And then you're going to come down and back to a circle where you're going to have chocolate, but now you're going to feel bad because you just avoided it and you're going to binge the chocolate. So it's about managing and being mindful about our cravings. And then we're going to reflect and adjust. So this is not a perfect process. We are just we're not striving for perfection here. And we're going to get better and better. So just because if we give into a craving or binge a craving or push past fullness within week 1 or week 2 doesn't mean we were doing different things that we did in the weeks before. So you have to be mindful of that. And again, we are not striving for perfection. We are going for progress here. Next. So this is the hunger scale. There are 9 different revenues on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes. So the hunger scale is a simple yet powerful tool to help you tune into your body's signals and recognize different levels of hunger and fullness. Instead of viewing hunger as just hungry or not hungry, just 2 points in time, the scale is going to show you how many different types of hunger that there is. So 1 is ravenous hunger. This is when we kind of are ignoring our body's cues. I spoke about practical hunger. That comes into play here. And a lot. Most times ravenous hunger happens is because we're waiting too long between meals to eat. And eventually if you start noticing that you are ravenously hungry every time at 4 p.m., we're going to add a mindful snack in at 3 or 3:30, because there's no point to just keep with that same schedule. It's about adding in and being mindful and making smarter changes. And it's not just adding any snack, it's maybe a protein-filled snack, or is our lunch not having enough protein in it, and things like that. So if we notice ravenous hunger patterns, how are we going to fix it? So it's usually with practical hunger or a mindful snack. So paying attention to that. Hangry, hungry, irritable. Usually these first 2 categories will end up going hand in hand with having a strong desire for a craving, either while in the hunger moment or right after the hunger moment, because we are emotional, we have no control, we just want what's convenient, we want what's satisfying, and then usually when we get to that point and we give into that craving, then the guilt comes. So we're trying to avoid being in these sort of levels. Comfortable hunger isn't bad, but you better have a snack or something on you. If you like your lunch or dinner is coming up soon, you can have that. But if it's not for another hour, then having a snack handy is going to be important, because then you're going to reach hangry, hungry, or ravenous hunger. Neutral, not hungry and not full is fine. Satisfied, you've eaten enough to feel satisfied, but not overly full. Comfortable fullness, a little too full, you're very full, and then there's painfully full. So fullness and painfully full is also associated with ravenous hunger or hangry, usually pushing past the fullness, because once you reach that sort of level, your satiation or satisfied has decreased. So for your stomach takes Your stomach and brain are connected. So it takes a few minutes for them to connect to recognize that you're full. So if we are at ravenous hunger, you're going to push past fullness. That's just something that's going to happen. But if we're at that comfortable neutral area and just eating, they'll start to coincide because we're not just stuffing our face because we're so hungry. So eating slower is important here too. These are the recognizing these points and where you stand. Now, just reading through this, you can be like, oh, wow, I'm always maybe below or I'm always above. It's important, like I said, to add these certain tactics that we talked about, having protein within your meals, having high protein snacks between your meals, recognizing your eating patterns, like having those meal timing frequency and calorie timing frequency are super important here. And why does this matter? Because listening to your body's hunger signal and listening to your body's hunger signals is going to help prevent the overeating and avoid this discomfort. We're getting to understand and take control of our bodies again because we have lost that through dieting and all what society tells us to do, and we are trying to gain control again. Okay, next is the food craving scale. So the food craving scale is going to help you identify and assess the intensity of your food cravings, and which could be used to managing your eating behaviors and eventually making healthier choices. So obviously number 1 is no craving, then mild craving, moderate craving, strong craving, and overwhelming craving. So if you have an overwhelming craving, it's usually coincided with ravenous or hangry hunger. It could also, like I said, there are certain other triggers. It could be menstrual and things like that. So if you are having a craving, we want to understand where it comes from. And here is some examples below. Morning check-in. Am I having a craving? No, you're satisfied from your breakfast. Mid-morning snack. What is you're having a mild craving. You have a slight desire for a specific food, but it's not dominating your thoughts. And it's potential cause is by seeing coworkers eating snacks. So like I said before, there's so many triggers for hunger, and this is a social one. And your trigger is you're not really having a craving, but it's being triggered because other people are eating things. So that's important. Lunchtime, your craving is at a 1. You enjoyed your lunch. Afternoon check-in, your craving is at a 3. You're having an energy dip and feeling stressed about an upcoming deadline. Pre-dinner, let's move this up. Your pre-dinner craving level is at a 2, slightly hungry, smelling food is triggering it for you. We talked about it, sensory hunger. And then evening snack is at a 3, watching TV. So this is the visual hunger is now triggered by seeing TV. So there are certain things that are going to trigger your cravings amongst the day, but recognizing and realizing where you are is going to help make you and assess better decisions. So now that you know the TV is what's making you have a craving, you're like, oh, okay, then it's not that big of a deal. Like, I don't need it. Or you can make a more mindful decision and have a more mindful snack. So this is more about what are potential causes, what can be your mental state and physical sensations that you might feel for these cravings. This is something that I want you to definitely read over yourself. And then problem solving. So how do we problem solve our cravings? So I did just talk about it a little bit it's being proactive, understanding, paying attention to yourself. That's the most important here. Since there is no cravings present, you can focus on maintaining your current state of satisfaction and continue with your planned meals and snacks with how you're feeling. Mild cravings. It's acknowledging how you're feeling, engaging in a different activity such as going for a walk, practicing deep breathing, drinking water, trying to reduce the intensity of the craving, or redirecting the attention of the non-food related activities. So again, we talked before that person was at a number 2 for a food craving because she saw her coworkers doing it. So it's knowing that's triggering you, getting up and potentially removing yourself instead of seeing that sensory overload happening that craving might increase. Moderate craving. This is acknowledging the craving without giving into it again. Practicing mindfulness techniques to observe the craving without judgment or finding a healthier alternative to satisfy the craving. So if you are having a craving for chocolate and it's your mid-morning snack time or lunch is coming up soon, like chocolate chips and a yogurt. Like, there is nothing wrong with chocolate cravings, sweet cravings. Like, we can have those cravings daily, but can you put them in a mindful way and a different technique versus just constantly going for it, like reacting towards it? Can we make a more mindful decision and put it in a more satiating snack? A strong craving is trying to remove yourself from the environment of the craving or the trigger that's causing it, using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, which we'll get into later in this course, and challenge and reframe the thoughts associated with the craving. So an example of this would be like if you're craving like pizza or hyper palatable food, and instead of trying to resist it and feel guilty about having the thought, or even a donut sort of situation, so pizza or donut, what you want to do is kind of reframe and challenge it and be like, I'm really craving pizza because my time of the month is coming, and I'm going to have the pizza, but what I'm going to do to make a more mindful decision is either order a pizza with a little bit of protein on it, or I'm going to have a grilled chicken salad on the side. So trying to reframe it and not have that guilt associated with that craving is super important. Also making sure that we are savoring each bite and not eating with distraction. Important with the strong craving. Now, overwhelming craving is practicing self-compassion and acceptance of the craving, or finding alternative ways to address underlying or emotional needs without turning to food. By addressing the root cause of overwhelming cravings, the goal is to develop coping skills to navigate challenging moments without relying on food as a coping mechanism. Overwhelming cravings require journaling. So this is when we get out of control with food. This is when we are going from food to food to food to food, and it's this chronic pattern. So this is going to require that we really find the root source of what causes it. For an example, is I had a client who had this overwhelming craving every single night that she would give into. Eventually, we found what the root source was, because it was time alone. It was the time to unwind. It was the TV. There were so many sensory things that were involved that we had to be able to remove and change the scenario. So you have to also be open to changing the situation that constantly causes the triggers. Besides that, I said overwhelming feelings of cravings also comes with ravenous hunger. So being able to understand X and 1 and 2 go together. Like 1 and 2 equals 3, basically. So if you're having ravenous hunger and overwhelming cravings, this is going to be the end result for you. So being able to manage things and work on it. So this is something that if you are having these overwhelming cravings and this is a constant factor that is happening, this is something that needs to be addressed in our call. So 5 steps to problem solve intense hunger. Kind of just touched on that a little bit. This is something that I want you to read over. This is some homework that you're going to be getting. I have a cravings worksheet for you. Something that is I have put in the corner for you to realize that there are so many potential causes for hunger and cravings. Like there are 8+ triggers for hunger triggers, and there are many more causes for potential cravings triggers. So here's a worksheet that you can go over. So with hunger and cravings, there's always a pattern to establish. And like I said before, you can go through the worksheet that I am going to be attaching to you and doing the homework that way. Or another way to go about it is before and after each meal or snack that you have, decide if you are physically hungry, if it's a craving, or if it's a 0. So 0 is we're establishing regular eating patterns. So you're just eating out of kind of routine and it's not physical hunger and it's not a craving. When you're physically hungry, I want you to define where you sit on the hunger scale. So 1 is being ravenous and 9 is being painfully full. So once you read over the packet and go through it, then once you are physically hungry, decide where you sit at that point in time. And then if it's a C, a craving that you're having, you can be like, oh wow, my craving is always associated with 1, and then I am at a 9. So things like that. With hunger and cravings, like I said, there is always a pattern to see there. And with this chapter, it might honestly be the hardest chapter because it's getting to understand and trust our bodies the most. So this is also another process that will not be done in a week. This takes time and applying and applying and applying because we have been chronically taught what to do. And now we're trying to truly get to know ourselves and our body and our hunger and cravings and things like that. So that concludes chapter 6, and I'll see you in chapter 7.